This is Rob Tebbutt for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. It's been a while, but I am delighted to be joined by one of my most favorite people in boxing, Kevin Parry, all the way live and direct from Las Vegas. KB, been a while, mate. How are you?
Rob, it's been a long time between drinks, my friend. I'm good, and it's great to see you and great to be on Boxing Social.
Well, it's always great to have you. Let's observe the pleasantries first. Obviously, it's been a little while. It's been a long time since I've been over in Las Vegas and seen you at your lovely gym or your lovely home. How are things over in Nevada?
Mate, I tell you what, it's a little concerning at the moment. This Delta variant sort of is frightening a lot of people, and the numbers have gone back up. And I think we dropped our guard a little bit for a while after a really nasty start to the pandemic, but it's a long way from being over. So even though the masks are off, at some places they're back on again, and we're on our toes.
How about boxing wise? Gyms open, some gyms shut. Has it been more difficult to get sparring? Obviously, I'm assuming it's been difficult to get international sparring. How are things over there in the gyms?
Yeah, look, I tell you what, the gyms are open. There's been a few gyms who have been really affected by, the outbreak of COVID, and different fighters bringing COVID into the gyms. We run a private facility. During the pandemic, we were very, very stringent on taking temperatures. We were encouraging people to get vaccinated. There was always hand sanitizer everywhere, and we didn't allow anyone in the gym without a mask for many, many months. Obviously, we've relaxed a little bit now. But a lot of gyms are still really battling this COVID.
Yeah, well, it's pretty similar over here, to be honest. Masks are now off, but I think it's kind of early stages. It seems it's sort of strange to kind of get back to any sort of semblance of normality. But anyway, moving on. I mentioned it's been a little while since we've last spoken. We're going to start with the past before we talk about the future. Since I last spoke to you, yourself and former WBO heavyweight champion Joseph Parker announced an amicable parting of ways. Myself, like many people who know you, Joseph Parker, and your relationship, were very surprised at that. I mentioned the fact that it was amicable. I caught up with Joseph a couple of weeks before he boxed Derek Chisora. Just your version of things, Kev. What happened?
Oh, look, I tell you what, Joe and I had a great 8 years together, a history-making time together, and we shared a lot of very memorable moments. I think it was just the right time for both of us. Joe and I are still great mates. I had Joe and his wife and his three beautiful girls around here for a barbecue last Saturday. They spent 8 or 9 hours with our family, and we had a great day together. And look, I'll always be in Joe's corner, but I think it was the right time. I think Joe might have been getting a little comfortable with me and getting towards the end of his career. I think it was good for him to make a change.
Well, it's nice to hear, as I keep using the word amicable, it's great to hear that he was over at your house. As we all know in boxing, it's not often the case, or not always the case, should we say, that splits are amicable. But just going back to what you said there, that you've achieved with Joseph Parker over the years and the time that you spent together, becoming New Zealand's first ever heavyweight champion, that's something that will be etched in history as long as there is boxing, as long as there is New Zealand sport. What does it mean for you to have played a part in that journey with Joe?
Well, obviously it was hugely satisfying, and it was one of the, greatest moments of my boxing career. And I've been around boxing since I was 8 years old, to train a fighter, and also somebody like Joe, who I was so close to, and to win that world title in New Zealand, fighting an undefeated 29-0 Andy Ruiz. December 2016, it's a day I'll always remember. And then, of course, defending that world title twice, and then fighting Anthony Joshua at Principality Stadium in Cardiff, the first heavyweight unification fight for 8 years, and fighting him in front of 80,000 people there in Cardiff. A massive experience. You know, great times that we shared together, and we will always have that.
Last question on Joe. As I mentioned, we'll talk about the future and everything that you've got going on with the rest of your guys. But of course, he did then go and box Derek Chisora shortly after that, a fight that we'd been really waiting for a couple of years, and one or two things kept getting in the way: spider bites, global pandemics, and the like. You know, what did you make of his performance against Derek Chisora? A very close, competitive 12 rounds they shared together.
Look, it was a tough fight, and I think it was always going to be a tough fight. And look, what a lot of people have to realize, you know, Joe went from New Zealand to Ireland, to England, you know, and he fought a really tough guy in Chisora with a, you know, first camp with a new trainer. So things were always going to be a little bit more difficult for him. I watched the fight. I was actually out of town. It wasn't televised here. I watched it on the streaming network. I was at the NFL draft, and I watched it on my laptop, and I scored it. I had Joe up by 2 points at the end of the 12 rounds. But look, it was a tough fight. A lot of people were disappointed with the result. You know, I thought it was fair.
Okay, so moving on. Just for the record, I actually had Joseph Parker 1 point up in that fight. But anyway, moving on from one heavyweight to another, Guido Vianello. How's Guido getting on? The last time we spoke, he was kind of in flux a little bit. Wasn't able to travel home to Italy, I don't think, the last time that we spoke. How's he getting on?
Well, funny you should mention that, because he's traveled home to Italy now, and he stayed in Italy. You know, the pandemic actually, it ruined things for Guido. He got stuck here in America, and the Italians are very family orientated people, and he did not do well with staying away from his family for a long period of time, and he opted to stay in Italy, and he's training now with his amateur coach. So, you know, Guido's not in the gym at the moment.
Is that something that you potentially revisit down the line? Obviously, COVID getting in the way wasn't ideal for everybody. A lot of people's plans have changed or had to change. What do you think the future's like for yourself and Guido?
Well, look, I know that Adam Morley and Sam Jones, you know, they were very happy with what we were doing here in Vegas with Guido. And, you know, it's hard. It's hard being away from home and being away from your family, and like it's not everybody's cup of tea. You know, when you travel to another country and you go into training camps for an extensive period of time, it's not something that everyone can do. So, you know, Guido made a decision to stay in Italy. I know he's done some sparring in the UK. We'll just have to wait and see how things pan out for him in his next couple of fights. But he's he's a very talented fighter, very athletic. You know, he's got a lot more to give to the heavyweight division.
Now, one fighter that you do still train, albeit again somebody else who's fallen victim to COVID and having to really kind of train away, is Smith-Salamov, who is the WBO light heavyweight mandatory. Now, that WBO light heavyweight situation, as we've discussed many times, has been something of a frustrating period for those guys involved with that. There is now a champion, Joe Smith. Before we talk about Smith-Salamov, of course, mandatory for Joe Smith, we're expecting that fight, or that fight will take place in October. I just want to talk about Joe Smith's fight with Maxim Vlasov. Maxim Vlasov, somebody I know that you know very well. Again, another very close and in some people's viewpoint, a controversial decision. Joe Smith versus Maxim Vlasov. What did you make of that fight?
Well, look, you know, obviously I was part of Maxim Vlasov's team. I along with Oleg Bogdanov, my partner in Russia, I put Maxim into a promotional contract with Top Rank, which enabled him to get the fight with Joe Smith. He did his training camp at our gym in Vegas. My son Taylor was in his corner during the fight. Look, we know that Maxim Vlasov won that fight. People watching the fight on ESPN know that he won that fight, and yet the judges had a razor-thin decision for Joe Smith, and he came away winning that vacant WBO light heavyweight title. So we knew it would be tough for a Russian coming to America, fighting an American, and that's how it turned out.
What's next for Maxim Vlasov? We obviously mentioned there that it was a very controversial outcome. I actually had Maxim Vlasov winning the fight as well. We often agree on these things, KB. I think it's
I know.
gone so well.
Well, I'm pleased that you had him winning that fight, because he definitely won it, and I think most people who actually watched it thought he won it. Max is like he's like the gatekeeper. He's 45-4. He's fought for the cruiserweight world title. He's fought for the light heavyweight world title. He fought Gilberto Ramirez as a super middleweight. He has, in 49 fights, he's never been stopped. He's a great fighter and a fighter to test anyone. And at the age of 34, I think we saw in that last performance, he's sort of peaking at the moment. There are guys out there, one being Callum Smith, who's just moved up after the Canelo fight from super middle to light heavyweight, who's looking for an opponent. Well, I just like Callum Smith and his team to know that Maxim Vlasov is available to fight him. If you ever want to test yourself in the light heavyweight division, Maxim Vlasov is that guy.
As I understand it, I think with Callum Smith, we're waiting on an announcement. He's obviously changed trainers since that Canelo Alvarez fight. Is now with Buddy McGirt, of course, American-based. I believe the plan, at least, is for Callum Smith to return at some time this year in October. I'm guessing Maxim Vlasov, being as well-travelled and as experienced as he is, would have no problem coming to the UK for that one.
Max is the type of fighter that backs himself against anyone, and he'll fight anyone in any country around the world. So look, I know that Max is always ready to test himself against the best opponents available. And if that fight was presented, it's a fight that I know his team would look at.
Now, one fighter who is going to face Joe Smith, as we mentioned, Umar Salamov, somebody that, again, you've kind of had your training time and your time with him impacted due to the pandemic. He has now got that opportunity in October fighting Joe Smith in New York. Talk to me about that fight. A lot of people who are watching this maybe not that familiar with Umar Salamov. Talk to me about the fight.
Umar Salamov, 26-1. He traveled to Australia and had his only loss there, and it was a 1-point decision. He didn't travel well. The weight cut wasn't well. So he should be undefeated. Umar is a very big light heavyweight, 6'3.5". He hits very hard. And it's a fight that we've wanted for a long time. We think that Salamov is the guy to dethrone Joe Smith. We're very happy that we've got that fight, that we're sitting in the mandatory position with the WBO. And it looks like, Salamov, Joe Smith sometime in October this year in New York. I've had Umar Salamov off and on from Chechnya and Moscow to Vegas over a 4 or 5 year period. We've watched him develop a lot during that time. I first saw him when he was as a light heavyweight standing there going toe to toe with Vladimir Klitschko in one of Klitschko's training camps. I've had him sparring Joseph Parker. I had him sparring Izu Ogano. I know what Salamov can do. Salamov is an extremely talented, very powerful light heavyweight, and we're very excited about this opportunity. And I think by the end of October, Salamov will be wearing that light heavyweight strap.
Having had Maxim Vlasov box Joe Smith, and again, by a lot of people's viewpoint, beat Joe Smith, how beneficial is that for you, somebody who's got such a keen boxing eye, to have already had a horse in the race, so to speak, when you're preparing Umar Salamov for that fight?
Obviously it's the more data you can get on a fighter, the better. But styles make fights, and Maxim Vlasov's style is very different to Umar Salamov. So, there might have been times that Joe Smith sort of struggled with the style of Vlasov. Salamov's a guy that will stand in front of him a lot more and exchange with him. And we know that, look, we have great respect for Joe Smith. We know he's very powerful. We know he's got very heavy hands, but so does Salamov. And that's what makes this such an exciting fight, is that, the styles will be similar. Both these guys will be banging.
Just before we move away from the light heavyweights, obviously the WBO light heavyweight division, or the top 15 at least, has got 1-2 British names in there. One of them being Lyndon Arthur, currently ranked #1 with the WBO. Just wanted to know what you make of Lyndon Arthur. We saw him return to the ring against David Fauci, I think is the pronunciation of his name. It's a shame Guido Vianello is not here to help with the Italian translation. But anyway, what do you make of Lyndon Arthur? Of course, he's due to rematch Anthony Yarde on October the 9th.
Look, very good boxer. I don't think he's, the biggest puncher in the light heavyweight division, but he's definitely got some skills. Earlier on this year, Salamov and Lyndon Arthur were supposed to fight, and I've still got the paperwork on that fight, and Arthur withdrew with I want to say a foot injury. Does that sound right?
I'm not too sure. I do know he had a contractual obligation for a rematch of Anthony Yarde, so potentially that.
Right.
But
yeah, so look, there was talk of them fighting. I know that he thinks that he's in line for a world title shot next year, and by then it will be his turn. And who knows? Him and Salamov could probably end up in the ring together if Salamov takes care of business against Joe Smith in October.
Okay, I just want to talk to you about some of your other new signings who I haven't actually met yet, because it's been such a long time that I've been in Las Vegas. So hopefully I can meet them soon. One of them being Joe Goodall, who's not somebody I know an awful lot about. Australian heavyweight who recently signed with yourself. What can you tell me about him?
Look, Joe's a really good prospect, and here I am with another Joe. Joe Goodall was sent to me by his manager, Steve Scanlon, and he said, look, I really would like you to have a look at this guy. We have a lot of faith in him. We think he's the real deal. I want to see if you guys have got chemistry. We think you will have. And he's been over here with me for the last 7 weeks, living in my house, training 2, sometimes 3 times a day. He saw what we did with Joseph Parker and the success we had, and he wanted some of it. He's making the most of this opportunity. He knows that his manager has put a lot of faith in him. So here's a guy that as a pro, he's 7-0-1. Fought his first 6 fights apparently with I'm told with a shoulder injury. That's all sorted out now. A guy that's a little under 6'5", for the guy who throws a lot of punches. He has a big motor. Was a very good amateur. He beat Efe Ajagbar in the amateurs. He lost to Joe Joyce in the final of the Commonwealth Games. At the World Amateur Championships, he got a bronze for Australia. It was Australia's first World Championship medal in 26 years. So it's a guy that's had a lot of success in the amateurs. He's currently has a regional WBC belt in the Oceania area. He's ranked about 30 in the world currently with the WBC, and a fighter that I think will really burst onto the scene over the next 12 to 18 months. A guy at the age of, he's 28 years old, so he's ready to go now.
One of the things that I want to talk to you about with regards to Joe Goodall is something that we've spoken about in the past with fighters, coming into Las Vegas, not from conventional hotbeds of boxing, which I think we can agree that Australia fits into that category. How quickly does a fighter improve coming from somewhere, say, like Australia or Italy in Guido Vianello's case, to really the hotbed of boxing in Las Vegas, where, world-class, elite-level sparring in some instances is readily available? How big of a jump is that, and how quickly do fighters improve under those circumstances?
Well, like when you take somebody who really has been boxing part-time and not trying to make, for a start off, not having the ability to train 24/7 to really find out how good you can be, and just how successful with the proper preparation that you can get. When you take somebody like that and put them into a situation like living in our house, Joe's around boxing 24/7. He's up at 5:30 in the morning running. He comes back, has breakfast, goes to bed. We're in the gym at 11 till 1:30. and he's back home for lunch, back to bed, and then we did the third session of the day at 5:30, a strength and conditioning session or a weightlifting session. So he's training all the time, and getting himself in an environment like that, you know, you're going to see the improvement, you're going to see the development, and he's hungry for an opportunity to find out just how good he is. And at the age of 28, you know, he's got no time to lose. He's got to make every decision and every poster winner now.
Before we move on, Kev, and touch on some other little bits and pieces, I just want to talk to you about, well, I know it's not necessarily a new venture. It's something that you've been working on for, excuse me, the last couple of years or so, but EVO, which is the management company, or the athlete in the combat sports athlete management company that you're working with, that you are part of, beg your pardon. Just give people a little bit of an idea as the backstory of that before we talk about your latest, well, your first of many signings.
Well, look, EVO is a revolutionary athlete development company, which is searching for the champions of tomorrow. Like, you know, EVO believes that there are so many fighters who never really reach their true potential, not because of a lack of talent, but because of a lack of funding. So EVO is the company that is funding these fighters that we find. And finally, after a 2-year stint, this was supposed to start just prior to the pandemic. As we know, the world was tipped on its head, and a lot of things that were supposed to happen during last year never happened. So here we are, we're finding ourselves, we've just signed our first fighter with EVO. We expect over the next 2 or 3 months, we'll be signing, you know, several other fighters with this revolutionary athlete development company. EVO is funded by the fans, and the fans own a piece of all the athletes. And EVO have motor racing, drag racing, they have golf, they have tennis, boxing, MMA. And when you invest in this company, EVO, you invest in every single one of their athletes. So you own a piece of the athletes. It's exciting, and a lot of people have been investing in EVO. A lot of people think it's a great concept, and we're excited about it. We've put a team of industry leaders together. We've got a lot of very professional people in different fields. We've got a great medical staff. We've got great strength trainers. We're working with some of the best trainers in the US. And I think when you have that ability to draw on the talent of real clever people in the field of sport, the results have to be good.
And we've just mentioned about making the first of many signings. Ulugbek Kakberdiev being your first one. What can you tell people about him? Obviously, unbeaten as a pro, history of being one of the many decorated Uzbek amateurs. What can you tell us about him?
Well, Ulugbek is a very interesting fighter, a fighter who had 300 amateur fights. So, like, you know, he's been a professional for a long time, even though his professional record is only 7-0. Here's a guy that's been around boxing his whole life at the highest level. I've watched a lot of his fights. I've had a lot of conversations with him. My partner Oleg Bogdanov has had Ulugbek on his books for a number of years, and he's put together some of his fights. One thing that really stood out to us, there was a guy, Dmitry Sokotsky, who had twice fought for the world title. Ulugbek fought him in his 4th fight and knocked him out in 6 rounds. So here's a guy that we're putting in front of good opposition early, and we think it's going to be a very exciting signing for EVO. Just waiting for the visas to come through now, and then he will be here in Vegas and part of the EVO family here in Las Vegas at the Team Barry Gym.
Well, we look forward to seeing that, hopefully when Mr. Biden lets me back into the country. But anyway, before we move on, we've kind of touched upon him at various different stages of the interview. How's Taylor, your son, of course, an integral member of Team Barry? How's he getting on? I haven't seen him in a little while, Taylor.
Taylor's going great. Like, he's busy in the gym. In fact, Taylor's just he's just changed the whole format of the gym around. This particular year, he's brought about 4 new sponsors on board. He's doing a lot of work with Fly, which is a company that you're probably very familiar with in the UK. Taylor is also heavily involved with the Raiders NFL team here in Vegas, and he's been training about a dozen of the Raiders for the last 18 months, doing all their preseason work, doing boxing training, and he's had athletes from other teams contacting him, seeing the results he's getting with these guys, and from other teams when they come to town have been training with them. So Taylor's going really well.